Hey, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We're super excited to be hosting this event. Do you want to be a UXR consultant? Very piercing question. So we're going to just make a few announcements and post some links while people are joining, and then we'll turn the time over to Danielle and get started. So this session is being hosted by the UX Researchers Guild, a community of researchers and consultants that join together to learn and connect with each other. You can see past events on our YouTube channel, and I think we just posted. Thank you for just posting that link. So any of our past events that are recorded are there, and we try to record them all. One of the purposes of the Guild is to help people network and expand their networks, strengthen their networks. So we have a networking spreadsheet, and it's completely voluntary, but if you'd like, you can post your information and then connect with other people on LinkedIn and kind of build your network from this event. Additionally, at the end of the event, we'll have a networking, just breakout networking in random small rooms. So if you'd like to stay on after to meet a couple of other participants, you're absolutely welcome to. We also have a Slack group. We just pasted the link for that. You're welcome to join the Slack group. And finally, well, not finally, we also have a survey for this event and all of the events. We, of course, would very much appreciate your input on the survey. So if you take a minute, maybe to start that now, and that'll have a link open for you, and you'll remember to complete it when the session's over. We're having a giveaway after tonight's session. We're giving a copy of Steve Portugal's book, Interviewing, how am I blanking? Interviewing Users. Edition. So stay on after the presentation and Q&A, and we will randomly give away a copy of that book if you're interested. And then finally, our upcoming sessions. So there's a Research Rumble session in February and our first book group session in March, which I'm super excited about. And Leah Hogan will be hosting Laura Kalbag and discussing her book, Accessibility for Everyone. So if those events interest you, feel free to join us for those events. Okay, awesome. Well, now it's my privilege to introduce our esteemed and featured presenter, Danielle Cooley, who is also a dear friend of mine in the Guild. So I very much appreciate her willingness to share her expertise and experience tonight.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Danielle has an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. She has a graduate degree, a master's degree from Bentley in human factors. Additionally, she has a career as a researcher and an amazing story of how she transitioned into becoming an independent consultant. She's been on our board at the Guild for a one-year term and extended for 6 months because we asked her to. And in many ways, just been one of the forces to help us shape the Guild. So I thank you so much, Danielle, for all you have done and for your presenting this session tonight.
Of course. I can talk about this and related topics for a long, long time. I am no longer monitoring the waiting room, so if you can keep your eye on that. Thank you for having me. I am a big fan of the Guild. I think there is a big gap in recruiting and staffing for UX researchers. When I was trying to find subcontractors in the past, it's just there are a lot of UX designers who say they are researchers because they've done research, which is very different from like being a researcher at heart. So I have prepared some slides to cover kind of the common topics. I definitely want to do an extended Q&A at the end to make sure that we can get as many of your questions answered in this context as possible, but then I will strongly encourage you to email them to me afterwards and I will answer them in other channels. So I assume you're all here because you at least think you might want to be a UX research consultant. As Raymond said, I have been a UX researcher, depending on how you count, for more than 25 years. And I have owned my own consulting practice for the last 15. So a lot of different experiences back there, and I'm happy to share them. I don't have too much about that in here. I do have this, let's see, so many windows open. This little about me slide. You know, as Raymond pointed out, I have this degree from Vanderbilt, another from Bentley. Probably many of you have that same Bentley degree, HFID. In my old life, I did a lot of work for a lot of big companies, either as an employee or as a consultant through another consulting firm, as an employee of another consulting firm. And then since I established my own practice, I have done work for, again, a whole lot of different kinds of companies. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. I put this slide first because this is everybody's question, right? How do I price my services? And there are generally two ways. You can do it hourly. If you want to estimate what your hourly salary or your hourly consulting rate should be, it is approximately your annual salary, and that is what your annual salary should be, not whatever you're underpaid as, divided by 1,000. And I can hear you saying, but wait, we work 2,000 hours a year in our corporate jobs. And yes, you do. But you will have a lot of unbillable time as an independent consultant, and you have a higher tax burden. I know the audience here is US and Canada. I do not know anything about Canadian tax law, so I will speak in that context. I only know what I know as a consultant in the United States. I'm also not an accountant or a tax attorney or anything like that. So if you make $100,000 a year, or let's, for easy math, then you divide that by 1,000 and your hourly rate is about $100 an hour. The alternative to that is to have a fixed fee project where you say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for, X $1,000. And that is typically based, it has some roots in the hourly rate, right? You know about how long this is going to take, but it's really based on the value to the customer, right? When I give them these recommendations for what they need to change in their interface or how they need to move forward with their strategic planning, what is that worth to them? What are they going to gain in revenue probably, or efficiency, or cut costs, right? In terms of returned product or call center volume or all of those things, right? So the idea is if that fixed fee, if the value to that company is less than what your hourly rate would be to do that project, you definitely don't want to do the project, right? If your fixed fee is about your hourly rate, then you start looking at other factors. And if that value is higher, then that value is higher. It's okay. I guess I just see a lot of people undervaluing themselves here, where, you do a project I worked for the second largest healthcare system in the United States, right? And so if they can increase their body of patients by like 1/4%, that's worth millions and millions of dollars to them, right? And so I shouldn't say, well, it only took me like 15, 20 hours to do that, so I'm only going to charge, $2,000, right? It's worth a lot more. So I will say, if you decide to go through the UXR Guild, they make these things very easy, right? This is published on the website. If I'm a researcher and I offer my services through the Guild, this is what my pay range at least is going to be based on my experience, right? And this is a pretty good guide as well. Fair enough. Definitely put questions in the chat, I should say. And although I'm not really monitoring it, if something critical comes up that is going to make the rest of it not make sense, please somebody jump in. So we have a little poll. Where are you in your path to becoming an independent consultant. So maybe you're just kind of thinking about it. Maybe you're a little farther. Maybe you've made the decision. Maybe you're doing it a little bit, and maybe you've been doing it a long time. I said established, I called it a year or more. But of course, you could still have a lot to learn, I guess, after 1 year. And certainly in those first few years, it gets interesting. All right, so wow.
All right, I have launched it. Can you see it?
I can see it. Yes. Can everyone else see it?
Okay.
Or
And both questions popped up together. So if you want to just do the one and then we'll launch the second. I'm not sure how that works, but
I don't know how that works either. So yeah, so in a couple of slides, we have another poll, which you can see if you scroll down from this one. I think this number one is clearly, a lot of people just sort of investigating it, the possibilities. That's fantastic. A couple of people have been doing it for a little while. I think that's also fantastic. 18% about. And then if we go down into the second question, it's really more feeling out, what characteristics do you have that are conducive to success as an independent consultant? Which is not to say you 100% have to have all of these or that this is a comprehensive list, but it is a helpful set of things to think about, right? So I'm comfortable taking risks. Well, I'll talk about those a little bit later. I'm seeing a lot of people answering well. Low points are sales, UX network, financial safety net's a little bit low, and then the buck stops with me and I can handle setbacks emotionally. So we might pull that up again to Janine when we do get to that section, that slide. All right. I'm going to say
end this.
Yeah, let's end this one.
Okay.
Hopefully we can get it back. So can you guys see the results?
Oh, let me go
Oh, well, let me share them.
share results.
Can I see? Can you see them now?
You can see results from the first
Okay,
one,
so
not the second one.
58% just feeling it out. 14% have gotten a little bit farther than that. Just a few, decided but haven't made the leap yet. Another 15% have been doing it for less than a year, presumably, and then 6% have been doing it for a year or more. I'm curious in the chat, those of you who have been doing it a year or more, how many years have you been in the doing your own UXR consulting? Okay, I got 2.5 from Lauren. 4, okay. 2. There are 7 of you. Okay, 5. That's okay. I won't make all 7 of you answer. So that's great. Nice. You've probably worked out a lot of little kinks, and some of you, probably have learned a lot of sort of harder lessons going on there. So I'm going to stop sharing and hope that I can share the others as well when we get to it. So who are we talking about? Who should think about being a UX research consultant? Well, anybody, right? But not just anybody. It's, people with that background in user experience. This brings us to the second poll, right? Like, what characteristics do you have? I can sell my services confidently. We don't have on here necessarily that you are a really good UX researcher, although certainly one would hope that is part of the deal. Let me see if I can pull. Okay, so I can share the results again. And if you scroll down, you'll see that second question. 64% comfortable taking risks to achieve your goals. There is inherent risk, right, in owning your own business, especially if it is your primary or sole income source, even more so if you're trying to support a family on it. Are you a good communicator and networker? Selling your services confidently is definitely not something that UX researchers in practice tend to have to do very often, or develop skill sets in. So I'm not surprised to see that being really low. And it is something where not just in UX research, but any subject matter expert who becomes a consultant in their field typically has to learn how to sell that. And, it's hard sometimes to come across resources that help you, because you'll find out, people will be, oh, I can do direct mail. I can send postcards to everybody's house. Well, guess what? Almost none of those people, approximately zero, have any need for UX research services. So that's not helpful to you. You probably, you would be aware of, but just the advice is not necessarily geared to the type of consulting we would be doing. A variety of different organizational environments. This may or may not be necessary, right? Depending on how you target your practice, but it is helpful. It has been helpful to me to have worked in large enterprises, worked in scrappy startups, worked in consulting agencies, worked in digital marketing agency. I got a lot of very interesting experience in. So if you've always worked in enterprise UX research and your clients are going to be enterprise UX research, great. But having that variety gives you a few more opportunities. Building up a strong network of UX professionals. I'm surprised to see this number so low, honestly. Definitely work on this, whether you make the jump or not. It is really important to have a strong network of peers. And almost all of my work comes from people I've worked with in the past, either as fellow employees or since I launched the practice. So being able to do that, having people say, oh, my UX department has this need, we don't have enough staff for it, or, I know that this department needs X, we can't give it to them because we're not allowed to, internally cross budget pockets or something bizarre. So they'll talk you up to something or other. But having that strong networks of UX professionals is valuable no matter what. And look, we're a very friendly group. Okay. Every time I go to a conference and there are, new people, junior researchers, fresh graduates, they always tell me how stunned they are about how people are willing to talk to them and people are interesting and engaged. And so don't be afraid of doing all of those things. Working extra hours at time to keep up with multiple projects and non-billable activities is, again, something you can control a little bit in your practice, but it can get out of hand pretty quickly. Financial safety net is very important. It is the nature of this work that is feast or famine. Last year, or 2022, I made about 70% of my annual income in November and December of that year. So it was, wild feast or famine. That was a little bit unusual in how different, how disparate it was. But already, I'm seeing that this year, like I've got this lull and then there's going to be some proposals that go out and there'll be another peak. And you can't just be like, oh, there's all this money in my bank account, because it will not be there in 2 months, right? It's not still coming in. I like to say the only way I can do this is because I have a spouse who has a magic fairy drop a paycheck into our bank account every 2 weeks, no matter what, right? He's full-time employed and has the group health insurance and the magic fairy. So it can be challenging. And then the buck stops with me. Yes, you have to take responsibility for your work and being able to handle those setbacks emotionally. It feels personal when something falls through, even though it's not. And it can be tough, especially if it's like hit after hit after hit, to continue moving forward, right? Instead of just, burying yourself in a hole and watching Netflix for a week. So that's where these come from. These are all from the UX Careers Handbook from Corey Lebson, another friend of the Guild. And it's a worthwhile book to consider different career options, including independent consultancy. All right. My friend Brian O'Neill said, if you want to do UX research all day, do not become an independent consultant. And he is spot on. I mentioned you divide your hours by 1,000 because you have so much non-billable work. If you want to go on your own, be ready to be the chief everything officer, right? You have to shop around for your desk, for your home office. You need a new webcam. You have to figure that out and order it and pay for it. You need to sell your stuff. When someone agrees to a proposal, you have to read the contract, right? Unless you have really deep pockets and you're willing to pay a lawyer to review every contract, you're going to have to learn how to do that. You need to keep track of your books. You need to keep track of, I only have subcontractors. I don't currently have employees, but at some point you need to keep track of, okay, who are we hiring? Under what terms? Do we have all the paperwork we need? Are we filing the right tax documents for them? If they are W-2, are we withholding things properly? You're the office manager. Did you run out of printer paper? That's on you. You got to figure it out. You're your own tech support. Why is this webcam not working? Why is my printer broken? Why doesn't my video show up when Zoom happens? I remember I worked at a PR agency for a while, and they had me working on site some days. And some clients will issue you a computer for security reasons instead of having you use your own. And they had done that, and I needed a different. It was a MacBook, so the power cable changes every other year, and I had the wrong one. And they said, "Oh, well, call IT." And in about 5 minutes, someone showed up with an adapter, and it plugged it into my laptop, and then the power cord worked. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. This isn't me trying to figure out what kind of adapter it is. Do I need to buy a whole new power cord? Or is there an adapter? If so, where do I get one? How quickly can I get it here? Just my problems were magically solved. And that is not how it works when you're on your own as an independent consultant, right? So you've got to figure out all this yourself. And of course, do the work, right? Especially in the beginning, you're doing that research work. You're recruiting, or you're managing recruitment. You are helping people figure out what software tools to use. Delivering the report on it, right? Delivering test plans, all of those things. That's all you. So be ready for that. And then, all right, so we figure out who it was. It's you, hopefully, with a lot of caveats. And there's no shame in deciding it's not for you, right? There's plenty of people who do it and love it. There's people who do it and hate it. And that's true for consulting and corporate and every other sort of environment as well. So, but what though? What kind of work are you going to do in your consulting practice? My friend Jim says the riches are in the niches. And when you specialize, it's very scary, right? Because you say, I'm going to only work on this type of stuff. And you think, well, gosh, if somebody calls me for something else, I still can do it. I don't want them to not call me. But what niching does is really help you target your marketing and your messaging, right? So this could be in industries, right? Like I only do research for healthcare in the healthcare industry. Maybe it's even, subdivided within that where I do it for, hospital systems or urgent cares or insurance companies, health insurance companies, right? Those are very different practices. Maybe I do financial services. Maybe I do medical devices. There are a whole lot of those. Some people say I work explicitly with startups or I work explicitly with the enterprise. And that doesn't mean, of course, that you can't work with the others, but it helps you target your message, right? Because what an enterprise person needs to hear is not the same thing that a startup person needs to hear. What kind of categories, right? Like I only work on these large enterprise products, which is very different from working on something that you need any consumer to be able to do, right? Like if you work for TurboTax, that has to be something that pretty much any person would be able to pick up, and you don't know what their screen size looks like, and you don't know what their operating system looks like, and you don't know what level of expertise they bring to the problem. Whereas if you're doing enterprise software, you're like, okay, this is something that's going out to trained salespeople, each of whom has been issued, you know, an iPad Air nth generation, and I know exactly what they have. Product types, you know, somebody told me once, they're like, if you could be the SharePoint UX person, you would make a bajillion dollars, right? Because SharePoint's used everywhere, it's miserable, and it's hard to give technically feasible advice in SharePoint, right? Because it's tricky, and that's probably true for, you know, many other large enterprise systems, right? But maybe you really want to focus on social media apps, or you want to only do intranets or games. Maybe you only want to do early discovery research, or maybe you only want to do evaluative research. Maybe you want to be the journey mapping person, right? I want to be, anybody needs a journey map, I'm the first person they think of, right? Or some other method. And this, of course, again, is not a comprehensive list, but if you wanted to niche, you could do that, but you don't have to. You certainly can find work. Otherwise, you can, you know, market yourself as a thought leader and an expert and get a nice variety of work. But I do feel like I need to make that point, right? That specializing is ultimately better for people. And if, you know, if you're, as in digital product design, right? If you're designing for everyone, you're designing for no one. If you are marketing to everyone, your consulting services, you're marketing to no one. So you need to think about who you're talking to. So when do we do these things? Well, remember this guy? When these things are pretty true, that's when you want to do it. And then especially this financial safety net. The other thing about consulting is the service is always business to business, right? A business is hiring you to do the work. Whether it's to work on a product that goes to a consumer is another question. But just the process, you know, you and the product owner or the VP you're talking to will be in complete agreement on the terms and the scope and the timeline, and then legal and procurement take 4 months to get everything signed off and done. So, you know, if you leave your employment and start that process the same day, it might be 4 months before you see any revenue from your consulting practice. Certainly, I would advise you have a client lined up of some kind before you jump, if you can, but just be ready, you know, start building up that safety net as much as you can. And some people say, yeah, I own my own business and I have so much flexibility, right? Oh, you can work whenever you want. And people say, yeah, you can work whichever 80 hours the week you want. You want to be nocturnal and only work at night, good for you. You can still go on your kids' field trip next Friday, but you have to shift it. I do not work 80 hours a week, except that one weird, you know, November and December 2022. If you wanted your practice to just explode, you would have to hustle, at least in the beginning. And it is more work than you think, right? To get that generated. I have a side business as well. And people are just like, God, how did you get this far? And I said, God, if anybody had told me at the beginning that that this is what it took, I probably would never have done it. But it was just sort of each next step was doable. And I think that's true here too. Like each next step is doable, and you'll grow and succeed. I don't want to make it all negative, but I do want to be realistic. Where? Well, of course, it's 2024. You can do it anywhere. Hopefully you get to go to the beach in Greece and do some work. But to do that, you do need some tools. This is another question I get a lot. Like, what do I need to buy or have or do, right? And even though there's a lot of stuff on this page, it's not much, right? If you're launching a product, I have a friend who's invented a new toy, right? And so he's got to physically buy, manufacture, buy raw materials, pay the manufacturer, pay for freight, get all this stuff, and he has physical product that he has to drop many tens of thousands of dollars on for each run. We don't have that. Like, we need a laptop. I strongly suggest you get a web domain and an email address associated with that. You know, a domain costs like $20 a year. Gmail, to get it tied to that, mine's at dgcooley.com, right? That costs $6 a month. So very easy and inexpensive. You do need some sort of presentation, spreadsheet, documentation tool. But again, Google Workspace is very inexpensive. Maybe it's gone up a little bit. It might be $8 a month now. So if you're not ready to invest in Office, or you don't have sort of a cheap backdoor into getting Office, this works great. Plenty of people do that. I strongly recommend having a cloud-based storage or collaboration system for that. Again, Google Drive included in that $8 a month. You need some sort of meeting tool. I do pay for Zoom for a couple of reasons, but you don't have to, right? You can easily use Google Meet or some others. It is really helpful to have some sort of accounting tool. Wave is free. So FreshBooks and QuickBooks are great, but it definitely is, there are options here. Do you need these specialized tools, you know, specific to our industry and our work? Not necessarily. User testing is very expensive. It is targeted to the enterprise, right? So very large companies to get these user testing licenses for many tens of thousands of dollars. So I only use it if my client has a license already. Optimal Workshop is, I think, $2,500 a year. I also don't subscribe to that annually. I will do a monthly subscription for 2 or 3 months, however long the project is going to last, and then I cancel it, and I make sure I account for that in the project proposal. Loop 11, similarly, I don't touch Figma. This is how I knew I was a researcher and not a designer, was when Adobe, well, they backed out, but when the big announcement came that Adobe was going to buy Figma, I was like, okay, yeah, I didn't care at all. And the design LinkedIn was, you know, all ready to wear black and, you know, just die of sorrow. And I'm like, okay. But those of you who would be developing your own prototypes for testing, for example, would maybe want some sort of prototyping tool. That said, it doesn't have to be Figma. It can, there are, you know, I prototype a lot of stuff in PowerPoint or Mural or Miro. Those are pretty inexpensive. Mural and Miro are pretty inexpensive for an annual subscription, like a couple $100. So it's not like you have to save, you know, a ton of capital to invest in starting your own practice, which also means you can kind of start on the side while you're still working if your employment contract is amenable to that, right? I will recommend that you find your why, right? You know that book? Because it's easy to burn out, right? It's easy to get frustrated, just like in as an employee, right? You do all this great work, you have all these great recommendations, and they go in a drawer, and they don't get implemented, and you're like, why did I bother, right? So I only included the why because of who, what, when, where, why, right? But I do think it's important for keeping yourself motivated, keeping your eye on the prize. And then how? This is another great question I get all the time, is how do I get clients? And there are a bunch of different methods. I mentioned that most of mine are word of mouth referrals. So either from past clients or past coworkers. I have another independent consultant who has decided to specialize in medical device validation testing for the FDA. And she has invested a lot of SEO, you know, that her website comes up in search results when people look for medical device validation testing. I less so since COVID, but I used to do a lot of speaking and writing. So at conferences or in UX journals or, hopefully in other things. I used to speak at developer conferences, which was a ton of fun. Highly recommend, especially if it's local to you and low investment, because they think you're brilliant. They've never thought of these things, and you can give the most UX 101 talk, and they're just like, oh, at least the ones who bother to come. It will be the smallest attended session during that block, but it's helpful. And I have gotten clients from it. It's a long tail thing, right? They'll say, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I heard you speak, and now we have this need, but they knew to come to me, right? LinkedIn is another resource. I've seen people use it just to say, hey, anybody want a UX research consultant? I'm available, or I have availability coming up in March, or, and they get work that way. And other people, well, maybe both ways, right? But use it to demonstrate their thought leadership, right? To post frequently and try to expand their reach. All of these things have sort of mixed levels of success and may depend more on, again, what you've decided to specialize in, what is easiest for you to do, and I guess what you're most likely to do. It's like exercise, right? The best exercise is the one you do. I would say the best lead gen is the one you can do consistently and will do consistently as well. And then finally, I gave a talk like this a while ago, and people were like, well, where do you find, proposal templates, or, how do you know what to put in a contract? Did you just Google it? And I was like, yeah, I just Google it. And then, maybe I'll ask someone to review it if it's really important. A peer is often willing to give your stuff a look. But absolutely, you can just Google it. It's okay. People, they're not walking around as experts just magically. They just Googled it and found stuff out. So if you are interested in hearing more about this, on February 6th, I believe, I will be giving another webinar. It's a 2-hour one with all 4 of us, Carol Barnum, Corey Lebson, Jennifer Romano, and myself. There's a link down there for you to sign up for that or learn more about it if you're interested. And I will share this deck if you want. We'll get to that in just a second. You can keep in touch with me through my newsletter. Right now, it is an every other month newsletter. Next year, it might be a monthly newsletter, but never more than that. Of course, you can unsubscribe anytime. We don't sell your email address. The easiest way to sign up is to go to the website and just enter your email address on the bottom. And then if you want a copy of this deck, you can scan this QR code or email dgcooley@sendyourslides.com with the subject Indie UXR Jan 2024. And I'll leave this. Let me just make sure the next slide. Oh, and we're going to give away a copy of Interviewing Users. So I'll see when, Raymond, how you want to make that happen. But how to do? Oh, 7:40. So we do have lots of time for Q&A. I'll leave this up while we do some Q&A maybe.
You're doing great, and there are a lot of questions that Janine has kind of pulled from the chat. So let me start you on a few of those maybe.
Excellent.
One of the people asked, what's the difference between consulting and freelancing?
This is my soapbox topic, Raymond. I do not use the term freelancing, and I do that very intentionally. And that's because the connotation of the word suggests that it's sort of a side gig. It's sort of, work I do sometimes, or work I do for extra money, work I do just myself, right? But thinking about yourself as an independent consultant who is a small business owner, who runs a consulting practice or consulting firm, changes your mindset about what you're doing, right? Freelancers, of course, many people call themselves freelancers and do all these things too, right? But in my mind, it's more serious. It has more gravitas. It carries more weight in terms of it being in other people's eyes, right, more of a legitimate vendor source for their company. And especially going to bigger companies, it's unusual. Like, they do work with other companies, right? They rarely work with individuals. And so as a person who prefers to work with larger companies, I find it much better to have the business entity and to use that language of a small business owner instead of just a freelancer. And there was a blog post that set me up on that, many years ago, but I've stuck with it.
Okay, I think that's a great.
Is that a good answer? I should also say, what is the difference between a consultant and a contractor, which is also a word you did not hear me use. And the difference is contractors are extra hands and consultants are extra brains. So a contractor often is like a full-time 40-hour-a-week contract for X number of months or indefinitely. Sometimes it's less, right? They say we need someone to build these wireframes, right? Or take these wireframes and add this layer of visual design to them by using this style guide, right? Or this design system. Whereas a consultant is more like, here's the problem we're trying to solve. How do you think we should approach it? Right? They're buying your expertise instead of just your skill that you've developed. So I do not use the term contractor to describe my work.
Love it. Okay, Luke had a great question here. Let me just see if I can pull it up again. If a company, basically he said, if a company already has a UX research group, what are they hiring you to do?
Oh, well, they're usually hiring me to do stuff they don't have enough bandwidth for. So that large healthcare client I worked with, they had 6 or 7 pretty large projects going, and they needed researchers on all of them, and they just did not have the internal staff to do that. And so, I and my subcontractors were brought on to help those teams, like embedded in those teams, to help them get through different issues they were facing, and sort of even help with the strategic product direction. Here's the features we should prioritize now because we saw this was really important to users in the research we did. So yeah, there's a lot of that.
Someone else asks, do you have any sense of what the market is going to be like in 2024? Obviously, 2023 was a very tough year for researchers.
Yeah, I have no idea. I certainly would not try to predict that with any accuracy. I know it feels like, and there have been, of course, many tech layoffs, many UX research layoffs and UX design layoffs. And I did see a large influx of people saying, well, now I'm going to go out on my own. And some have stuck with it, right? But some really, it was really a stopgap, right? They felt like it was going to be a long time until they got another full-time role. And so they were going to try to generate some work in between. And there is nothing wrong with that. Like, you got to pay your rent, you got to eat. No problem with it. But it is a different level of investment than trying to build your business and with some strategy versus doing some work. Maybe that's what I would call more freelancing, right? And then spending half your time on a job search as well. I will say that my work hasn't slowed down. And a lot of times I will call someone and say, I need an extra pair of hands on this project. And they're like, I'm booked. You can't. And one time last year, I went through 4 or 5 people before I found someone who had availability, So it's not like, there are still people out there who need this work. And the fact that so many don't have it in-house anymore, it's bizarre because it's so expensive to hire a consultant versus an employee. But But of course, the bookkeeping in corporate land is a little bit bizarre and beyond my level of understanding. I mean, certainly they can hire me for 3 months and then I'm gone and there's no sort of HR issue with it. That was our contract. I'll do this for 3 months or until X amount of work is done, and then we'll part ways. But yeah, all those places still need the work done. They're probably doing a little bit less of it, but the ones who know the value and are willing to make a little bit of a longer term investment, instead of, we won't do the research and we'll save money this quarter and then we'll launch this terrible product next quarter and it won't sell, right? Or our customer service lines are going to be flooded. They want to make sure they're still doing the right thing and doing the thing right.
Well, Danielle, if you want to stop screen share, we might let people raise their hands and ask some questions directly, but I've got one more for you.
Okay.
We do that, which is a great question. How do you differentiate your business from large companies that offer consulting services, or larger competitors who offer research?
Right. So obviously there are larger competitors that offer these services. There are, larger agencies that also offer design and development services, right? Because you can say, it's great, I have this research, now I need to implement these recommendations. And I can bring in subcontractors to do some of that, but it is interesting. That's one place where your niching can help you stand out. I try to present myself as industry agnostic, and the value that adds, right, is where I can take something from an automotive industry and say, hey, financial services company, I've seen this kind of problem before, not in financial services, but here's what worked in this other context. And it's fantastic, right? Because someone who had specialized in financial services would not have seen that, would not have that perspective. I also talk about how I have an engineering degree and that my human factors degree is from a business school. So that I really have a deeper understanding of the three aspects versus some consultants who will, propose something cool or propose something that's really great UX, but isn't technically feasible to implement, right? Or won't move the business forward enough, or doesn't really support the business goals at all. So those are a couple of things that I try to differentiate myself with. I did have a call last year with, actually, well, I shouldn't say because we're recording, a very large nonprofit that you would know. And the guy's like, we could just spend the money and hire Nielsen Norman and not think about it. And I was like, well, you could. I said, but I would put my work against Nielsen Norman's work any day. And I would, I've seen also other consultancies that charge huge amounts of money, and the quality of their deliverables is very similar to what I produce and my team produces. So, like I said, it's doable, right? You are the same person. You could go work at one of those big companies. You could go work at Answer Lab. You could go work at, what's the one in Chicago? I'm blanking. Anyway, but it would still be you. I mentioned in the newsletter, my very first client said, oh, I got laid off from a consulting company. And that's when I started. It's when I decided to start being an independent consultant. I had been thinking about it for a while. And they said, well, we've been talking to this company. And I said, well, 3 weeks ago, I was an employee there. So you would have hired them and you would have gotten me. And he's like, true, and you would have paid twice as much for me because of all the overhead they have, right? And they hired me and I did great work for them. And then they hired me again later. So I hope that answered your question. I got a little tangenty.
I think it was a great answer.
All right.
Jared has a question.
Hey, Danielle, thanks for taking my question. This one's more of a minor one, but when it comes to legal documents like, contractual agreements, maybe mutual NDAs and all that, I found some templates on Google that are provided. Do you recommend that we can leverage those when starting out, or do you recommend going through more of a professional service like LegalZoom, or not even LegalZoom, just going to a lawyer?
So I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, of course, but I would at least take a look at it and read it with a critical eye, maybe ask a peer. Sometimes I ask other consultants, like, can you share your subcontractor agreement, right, that you use? Or when I would contract to other companies and they would have me sign an agreement, I would just kind of use that, right? They had lawyers look at it. So I think whatever you found on Google is probably a good start. I follow this woman on LinkedIn. Her name is Amanda Morcata Perkins. I put her name in the chat, and she is a lawyer working with companies, small companies like us. She did a lot of work for me last year, but it was very expensive, I'll say. So I don't think that that is where I would invest my money at the very beginning. But she has an old post on there that's just a list of things that you should make sure your contract includes, right? Like it should have a timeline. It should have acceptance criteria. It should have payment terms. It should have basically at any point, if there's a question, you want to hammer it out. You want it in the contract. You don't want it to leave anything open to interpretation if you can. So I guess my short answer is yes, but at your own, I don't want to accept liability for saying it, but that's what I did for a long time. LegalZoom, the lawyers I talk to are like, yeah, it's not good, but if you don't have $5,000 to drop on a lawyer, then you might be doing that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
And yes, if you can afford a lawyer, absolutely get a lawyer. But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Garrett. Let me move on to Victor. Victor, glad you joined us for this session. Go ahead and ask your question.
Maybe muted, Victor.
You're gonna skip Victor and go on to
Yes.
Rachel.
Sorry, I was having some trouble getting off mute. Thanks for organizing, and thank you so much for the great insights through the talk. I just have a quick question around. So when you talk about, I'll call them your lead generation activities, so to speak. So when you're going out and trying to get some work, which avenues do you feel like are most successful, or which one do you get sort of the best bang for your buck from?
So in the session I'm doing on February 6th with Carol and Corey and Jen, the interesting thing is Corey uses LinkedIn with much success to just post, I have availability coming up in X month. Let me know if you want to work. He really likes to do in-person testing. So sometimes if he has a gap, he'll say, I'll waive my travel expenses if you book this time, and it works for him. It works really well. Carol Barnum uses search engine optimization, and she does pay an SEO firm, a pretty substantial monthly retainer to keep herself, in the rankings where she wants to be. And then mine so far has been almost all word of mouth and past employees. So I can't say which one is the most successful. It probably depends on where your niche is, where your target audience is, and what you are good at. Like if you don't have that deep network of UX professionals, like only 26% of you, I think, felt like you had that, then probably the word of mouth is not going to get you as far as if you did have that deeper network, for example. So I know that's a non-answer in classic UX style, but.
Oh, I thought
Understood. Thank you.
I think it's a great answer, Danielle, because each person can use a tool that suits them the best. I mean, they're really different avenues. And frankly, the word of mouth, the previous connections, it's the most powerful one. To me, that's the ultimate. So working toward that, I think, is a.
Yeah. And I mean, if you have a very narrow specialty that you've chosen, right? Say an industry, and you can get into the, a conference of healthcare product executives, and you can give a talk there or even exhibit. I mean, there's poor ROI on exhibiting, but if you could give a talk at a session like that, that might be hugely successful, right? Just that one thing. I mean, if you're giving a talk to I say talk at developer conferences, and that doesn't generate very much because developers don't write the checks, right? They'll maybe tell their boss that we need this and they should call me, but it's, I just more did that one for fun.
Let's take one more question and then we'll do our giveaway and breakout networking for anyone who wants to do that. So Rachel, the last question.
Yeah, thank you. Because I hopped on this actually because it was really helpful to hear the different strategies, but especially because I feel like my situation is kind of backwards to some, in that the reason I'm considering consulting is because of my niche, but I'm also worried that my niche is going to make it hard for me to do consulting, which is that specifically I work with cross-cultural products, more digital than anything, but and with linguistic issues. So my experience is very heavy in that, but almost every bit of work that I've done has been with really large products, really large organizations. And so I'm wondering if there's any resources or suggestions for how to consider doing consulting as like internationally and in a niche that is really like small groups don't really tend to take on big international projects. They tend to do smaller things. So that's kind of where I am. Like, I'm trying to decide if consulting is even going to work for me, given my strange specialization.
I think that if I had that skill set and niche, I would go in immediately, right? Like, I don't want to tell you what to do, but I see a big audience for that. I see a big hole there. I frequently see a need for, like, I am soon going to have some work that is going to require multilingual research.
Well, keep me in mind.
Yeah, drop me an email. And I really have been thinking, like, oh my God, where am I going to get that? And it truly is global. Like, it's Africa, it's Asia, it's Middle East.
Right.
So it's going to have to be multiple people. But I see a lot of that. And even domestically, my healthcare client, they do so much research in English because all of the research team are native English speakers. There may be one or two of, another language, but it's very difficult to recognize that selection bias, right? And say, well, what are the needs? I talk about inclusion a lot in some of my other talks, and that if you don't research with your whole audience, your whole diverse audience, your multilingual audience, your multicultural audience, you're not going to find the thing. So, one of the things we found was if you're looking for a doctor and you can choose a doctor who speaks, a foreign language, and they felt like it wasn't an important filter because nobody picked it in the research. And I said, nobody picked it in the research because they're all native English speakers or strong second language English speakers. But if you only speak Hindi and you need a doctor who speaks Hindi, that's a very important filter for you. So there are a lot of domestic applications, I think, for that specific specialty.
Mm. Okay, yeah, actually, thanks. Yeah, that's super helpful because mainly big things, and I've been thinking like it would make more sense than just being embedded in an organization, but I wasn't sure. So it's good to hear people are doing it. Thanks.
Yeah. Another one, I'll say Chewy Tan you can find her on LinkedIn too. She does a lot of multicultural research in Asia and the US, and has built a really successful consulting career on it. There's always going to be there's just enough work for everybody. There really is. At the beginning, I would get a little protective of projects or things, and it's more makes more, and rising tide lifts all boats. It's great.
What a beautiful, abundant, Danielle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great note to end on.
Indeed.
That there's plenty for everyone. Really so generous of you to share your secrets with 150 potential competitors.
Exactly.
But
There's
I-
enough.
I love your philosophy that that there's plenty of work out there to be done, and just helping others along helps the whole industry, which is a
Thank you, Raymond.
Ray, I just put all the links into the chat again before we get to the giveaway. So if you missed any of those, the spreadsheet, the YouTube channel, you'll need to scroll up a bit, but they're all there.
Thank you so much, Janine. And by the way, one of the links is to our calendar for the next two events for the Guild, the event for February and for March. So take a look at those to get more information.
Please do fill out your survey. I'd love to get feedback on this so I can improve it for future talks.
Great point. Yes, thanks so much. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to fill that up, that'd be great. Okay, so now we're to the giveaway. And here's how we do a giveaway. Danielle chooses a number between 1 and 100 and texts it, chats it only to me or Janine. How about just to Janine? And then
Okay.
and then we ask anyone who'd like to participate to put a number in the chat from 1 to 100. And whoever is at her number or closest to her number, we're going to send you a copy of Steve Porticle's Interviewing Users, 2nd edition, for you.
Closest without going over. Is that where we are?
No. There's no going over. It's just closest to.
Just closest. Well, we already have two then, within one below, one above.
Okay, there are little clues for you.
We'll see.
Somewhere it's in the chat. Now the hard part is with a group this big.
Yeah.
But really, we just need to have you all on record for what your number is, and then we can tell you what the real number is, and you can come forth and tell us whether you got it or not. And if we have, 5 different people who've chosen the number, we'll have to do a second round between those 5 to choose.
Yeah.
Okay, so has everyone put their number in? Who'd like to participate? Awesome. And Danielle, did you send your number to Janine? Janine, have you seen the real number? Okay, well, Janine, tell us the news. What is the number? Oh, wait, Janine, you're muted. Okay, maybe that's intentional.
Okay, the magic number is 27. And I didn't get all the way through. Tamara Gordon was 28. Did anybody put 27?
I didn't see it.
Nada was 28.
I saw 26 and a 28, and apparently 2 28s at least.
Let's see,
so.
Raisa.
Lisa and Laura.
She had 26.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Tamara, 28. And
Laura
Raisa.
Fortunato, 28.
Yeah.
And who else?
Laura Fortunato.
Okay.
Laura also had 28. Okay.
Did anyone have 27 that we've missed?
I don't think anybody got 27. Did anybody put 27? I don't
No one's claiming 27. I haven't seen it.
think so.
Quick runoff for anyone who was within 1 of the.
Okay. We have 3.
Daniel's come up with a new number.
Oh,
All right. So
1
we
to
got
100 again.
Tamara, Raisa, and Laura. Those are our 3. So here's the next number.
Mm,
Okay. All right. So you 3, if you will give us your best guess.
Yeah.
Drum roll. Thank you. Okay. Laura's 32. Tamara is 4.
Raisa, did you leave?
Right. Raisa is
Uh-huh.
18. Okay, the number was 15. So Raisa, you are the winner. And she's excited.
Congratulations.
I am. Thank you.
Sorry, Tamara and Laura.
But
I
unfortunately,
almost put 27 the first time, and it's so funny.
I hate it. Yeah.
okay, so for any who would like to stay on, we'll do some random breakout room networking, and you're free to meet another participant in the session and get to know them and connect with them. It's kind of another way besides the spreadsheet to connect with somebody. So completely voluntary. And we'll just I'll create 10 rooms and randomly assign participants. And if you'd like to join in, wonderful. Great way to meet somebody.
Raymond, do you need Raisa's email, or what do you need?
Please, yeah, however, why don't you give her your email too? Or yeah, Raisa, give us your information somehow.
Yeah, if you want to send it to me, to Janine, just in the chat, and we'll make sure you get your book.
Good one.
Opening
that's
the
great.
break-
I also put in the chat my email address. If there are questions we didn't get to, I'm happy to take a look at them, and my LinkedIn for myself and for the company.
Okay, awesome, Danielle. We put you in the networking spreadsheet as well. So people
Okay.
have LinkedIn to connect with and to reach out to message you to ask follow-up questions.
Fantastic.
Very generous of you to offer not only your time tonight, but to follow on with other potential.
Sure.